Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong and Lightstep from ServiceNow. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting webinar ahead, but first I have just a couple of housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session. If you do have any questions, we want you to send those in using the Q&A tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. This is also where you're going to find the chat tab, and that's where we want you to engage with one another, engage with us, let us know your thoughts throughout today's webinar. And finally, before we close, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around. So the title of today's talk is Building a Platform and SRE Team. And I'm joined by a vast panel who will each give you a little bit of their own introductions, but I will go through their names. We've got Austin Parker, Mitch Ashley, Adriana Villela, Alex Hidalgo, and Jason Yee. So to our illustrious panel, thank you all so much for being here with us. Mitch, you're probably going to be taking it from here, right?
I will take the wheel for a little bit there, Cody. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Great panel and a great topic. I'm pleased to be joined by my co-host, Austin Parker with Lightstep. Hey, man, how you doing?
I'm good. Helps if I take myself off mute. I'm doing great, Mitch. How you doing?
Very good, very good. I'm CTO with Techstrong Group, the folks that put on DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, Techstrong TV. I also serve as an analyst with Techstrong Research. So, and hosting shows like this with Parker. Do you want to introduce yourself, Parker, and then we'll have the panelists introduce themselves?
Yeah, so I'm Austin Parker, and I am head of developer relations at Lightstep. I've written a book on distributed tracing. I've run a DevOps conference in Animal Crossing. I've done a little bit of everything over the past 2 years. And at Lightstep, I'm really committed to helping both people that haven't heard of us and people have heard of us understand what observability is about and how it can make their lives, the professional lives, better. I don't know how much observability can do for you in your personal life.
Maybe
we're still working on that one.
The 2.0.
Yeah, that's 2.0.
Very good. Thanks, Austin. Jason, would you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Hey, everyone, I'm Jason Yee. I'm in Portland, Oregon. Up until this past Friday, so just a few days ago, I was the director of advocacy at a company called Gremlin, where we built a platform that made it safe and easy to do chaos engineering. So the practice of intentionally injecting failure into your systems to learn more about them and make them more resilient and more reliable. I'll be joining Datadog in about a month, so heading back there. That's actually where I was prior to Gremlin, similar to Austin, to preach the good word of observability and monitoring and data and using all of that information, again, to build better systems.
Appreciate you making us a waypoint on your journey back there. Great to have you. Adriana, introduce yourself. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Adriana Villela. I am a DevRel at Lightstep. I've had a varied technical career. I was a Java developer for many years, got into the DevOps thing 7 or 8 years ago. And then I think for me, that was like the missing piece in my life, and all roads have brought me here. My passion is to solve technical problems and write about them, which is how I got into this DevRel role. I love being able to make it easy for people to solve technical problems, which is why my technical blog posts are excruciatingly detailed sometimes. So I'm super happy to be here.
You're at the right place at the right time. Thanks for being here with us. Alex, great to be with you on a panel again. Would you please introduce yourself? Alex, author, of course.
Hey, everyone. My name is Alex Hidalgo. I'm currently the principal reliability advocate at Noble9, company based entirely around building the best service level objective tooling. And I'm also the author of the SLO book. I've been a site reliability engineer for over a decade, and I really love just helping teach people from the myriad of experiences I've had over the last 2 decades in this industry and various industries, and just very happy to be here.
Fantastic. And as Cody mentioned at the top, Lightstep is our sponsor for the show, with Austin and Adriana from the Lightstep team. We're super pleased to have them as a sponsor and working with us on thinking about the important topics that are important to the industry, for all of us, because that's one of the great things about our industries. We compete, we also collaborate together a lot. And of course, most of us know each other in different ways from working together at different jobs along the way. Well, let's get to our topic. Our topic is about building a platform and SRE team or teams. It seems of late, the platform engineering has really kind of been elevated too as one of the kind of functions or roles that you need to have. I think we maybe thought of it as an infrastructure team, and now we think of it more as a full stack. Maybe that's the wrong word, probably the wrong word. More of a full platform, what's involved in putting all of that together. And of course, SRE. And one of the questions is, are they similar? Are they the same? Should there be one team? Should there be different teams? Maybe we can tease that apart and get some good understanding of what is platform engineering, what is SRE. Austin, I'm going to have you kick it off and take it from there.
Well, I think you asked a great question right there. What is platform engineering and what is SRE? Are these two sides of the same coin? Is one a aspirational statement and the other an actual job function or job title? What is it? I mean, to prompt this a little, there's a pretty common refrain, I think, where people go out and they read the Google SRE handbook and then decide that every single thing written in there came down on tablets and we have to do all of those in our workplace starting immediately. And that maybe led to the popularity of SRE as a title or job function. And with that in mind, is platform engineering sort of the way to recapture that and say, actually, this is what an SRE does in the context of a normal organization or a normal team? What is it? There's a lot of definitions here, so I think we should probably pick one that works for us.
Jump in, panel.
Yeah.
Whoever like to go.
Otherwise, I'm going to call on people. Let's go with Alex.
So, yeah, I mean, I have a ton of thoughts about this, especially having been at Google for so long and being part of kind of the original drive of kind of spreading the SRE mentality and philosophy across the industry. I was involved with both Google SRE books. My last team at Google, I was actually on the CRE team, the customer reliability engineering team, where our entire job was to, help Google's largest cloud customers, as well as the industry at large, learn how to SRE. And I think when the books first came out, I think Austin kind of hit the nail on the head. It suddenly became this very popular and sought after title, discipline, approach, whatever you want to say, but that kind of sums it up is it means different things to different people. And I'm barely sure it really matters anymore exactly how we define SRE. It's something that is purely aspirational, right? I think a lot of people, especially the first SRE book, people read it and they're like, oh, we got to do it how Google does it. Trust me, that's not how people at Google did it either, right? Many teams may have adopted or perfected certain parts of that book, but no one did everything in that book, right? No one actually adhered to every single philosophy and doctrine and right? So the tablets handed down from a high, as Austin refers to them as, people trying to do all of them. Well, guess what? Google doesn't do all of them either. Right. And so I think it's important to kind of pull that apart and say, this is something we should be thinking of about an approach, a philosophy. And every single situation is unique, right? Every org is different. Every team is different. Every product is different. Every service is different. Whatever you're trying to keep reliable, reliability means something different for your customers, for your exact service, for your exact teams. And so I think the important part about trying to do SRE is to acknowledge that, right? Now, platform engineering is I think a very important aspect of having a reliable service, right? Like if you can't deploy and you can't keep things running and you can't provide the right environments for your developers to be able to deploy to in the first place, and if they can't understand what the dependencies look like and all that, like then you can't have a reliable service. So I do think it's likely that for many organizations, platform engineering and all the things that go along with it likely falls under the umbrella of site reliability engineering, or whatever terminology your company has chosen to use. But that also doesn't mean that's there's an equivalency there, right? Perhaps you have a very, very mature platform and you need your site reliability engineers to be focused elsewhere. Again, it's so dependent on your exact situation and your exact and what your exact service looks like.
Adriana, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Alex's book.
Well, I am too, by the way. We all are.
I quoted a whole bunch of snippets from the book to my old team, and I personally have struggled with this concept of like where platform teams lie, where SRE teams lie, what makes a good SRE team. I think my main thing, based on what I've seen, and I totally agree with Alex's comment of like everyone tries to be like Google, like let's stop it with that nonsense. Like you need a solution that fits your particular circumstances more than anything. But I think also like in terms of SRE, my philosophy is like getting out of that that old ops team mindset, because what we see a lot of is like the ops team rebranded as SRE, and well, okay, so it's putting lipstick on a pig. We're not actually getting anything new and innovative here. So I think starting with that mindset is hugely helpful. It's that whole paradigm shift thing, right? I mean, I know it's like been overused in the industry these days, but it is like you have to make that mental shift and embrace like those SRE principles of like, we are not like, let me give you an example. I worked at an organization where to deploy stuff to prod, we would have to write things in a Word doc and hand it over to somebody to execute those instructions. That is not cool. That should not be the status quo. We should not be okay with that remaining the status quo. Like we need to move past that sort of mentality. And unfortunately, there are still many organizations that follow that sort of mentality. So even like the act of like, okay, we need to stop with these ridiculous processes puts us one step closer to having that better SRE team.
I think that's actually an interesting point about the Word doc deploys, and I'm going to redirect this one to Jason. Are we making life harder on everyone by, having this very bimodal approach of innovation around platforms and SRE and so on and so forth, where on, one end of the spectrum, you have your Googles, you have your high performing engineering cultures, you have your like door, the people that have DORA metrics stapled to the back of the door. And then on the other side, you have everyone else, maybe not everyone else, but you have a significant amount of Fortune 2000 organizations that are doing, FTPing files to servers and creating change requests in an Excel sheet, right? Like, how can we help bring some of these practices that we all agree, I think, are very good, and yes, they're aspirational, but that aspiration has a nugget of like, hey, this is good stuff. How can we help pull that back towards maybe not the middle, but make it more achievable for people that are on this other edge of the scale?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, I think from what I saw at my tenure at Gremlin is that we're already sort of seeing that, right? I think a big reason why we had that original question of are platform teams and SRE teams the same, and we've sort of decided that they're not, but we decided that because of Alex's statement that SRE is sort of this philosophical thing, and I think the philosophy behind it, and one of the great things that's come out of all of this is a growing understanding that reliability doesn't sit with a single team, right? Reliability is everybody's responsibility, whether you're a developer, whether you're a platform team, whether you still call that team ops or even, sysadmins. Everybody's responsible to contribute to what we call reliability and to keep our systems and applications up and running. So I think that's one of the reasons why we've gone from this, like, is SRE a role in and of itself, or are these things that we should just be considering and applying to the way that we work? So when it comes to that idea of, not everybody is Google or Netflix or anything like that, as we start to think of how do we get this, like, I think we're already there, right? The SRE book, if I'm pull out some of the highlights, one is like, 4 golden signals is a big one that's been adopted far beyond just ops teams or platform teams. Developers are using that now. SLOs are a big one of that, right? Pulling this away from, if I'm a platform team, is this up or not? Or if I'm a developer, is this application just available, to this idea of, like, what am I actually doing and serving my customers? So I think those are 2 really big ways of how do we bridge this divide, right? Is starting to pull out a lot of those nuggets of, like, what can we apply no matter what size of organization we're at. And so that's been the first step that I've seen that a lot of folks are doing.
That's a comment actually from participant 730. Hello, whoever you are. It's weird referring to as a number, but I like your point about reliability is everyone's responsibility, but does everyone actually accept that responsibility and own it? And further, that seeing a lot of dev teams or engineering teams that are just pushing features, pushing functions, and sort of pushing off the responsibility level. And I think that ties into something I was going to bring up. I saw this very interesting Twitter thread the other day talking about platform teams and why the author thinks there may be a bit of an anti-pattern, or they're a bit of a not great. And to summarize, it's like 30 tweets long, so I don't want to read it off. But to summarize, the argument is effectively, one, platform teams exist because they're easy to make exist. They abstract away complexity from developers. They let you, have a clear owner for cross-cutting concerns like deployments and pushes and so on and so forth. But the reality is, you're never, as a platform team, you aren't, especially if you're deploying it to the cloud, you're never going to outperform, Amazon at writing docs for Amazon services, right? Like, they might not always be the best docs, but they exist and they're comprehensive. 2, the idea of, like, hiding this stuff from the devs, hiding, like, how does the database work, or how do I handle a sig term or whatnot, right? It's like hiding the gas prices from someone driving a car. There are a lot of ops concerns that devs need to know about because they do have very impactful changes to how you write your code. I think we see this in observability a lot, where instrumentation, as the amount of people on this call that have worked on observability, like, it's very popular to say, oh, you just throw this agent on here, right? But that agent, that automatic instrumentation, doesn't give you everything you need. It can get you some insights, but not all of them. And when you turn around and you start actually saying, well, how am I actually going to model this, and how am I actually going to do my instrument, if I'm going to really take this seriously, I have to understand how all this kind of works together. I have to understand the implications of the instrumentation and the overhead I'm creating, and so on and so on and so forth. So to lead this to a discussion point, is the idea of a platform team as opposed to platform engineering, is that just sort of a way to create a sin eater for all of our devs so that we can take all these nasty cross-cutting concerns and say, well, that's their problem, right? And should we be thinking more of platform engineering as a way to build rules of the road more than actual platforms? Let's go with Adriana again.
I'm very torn on that, but yeah, it's such a, like, I find it such a slippery slope, but I like the idea of there being somebody to build the rules of the road rather than the actual platforms, like basically the guidance, right? Because let's face it, we have to save technology folks from themselves sometimes, because it's so easy to, like, veer off course and do your own thing. And I mean, I've been guilty of that. myself. And so I do think that there's like a huge importance in doing that. Like even work that I've done in the past myself, like when I was at Bank of Montreal, my team and we were trying to coach DevOps practices across the board to this massive organization. And we kept finding out that people weren't following our practices. And so what we decided to do was, screw it, let's just codify these practices. Because that way, like, it's easy. You've got your rules to follow so that you can do the right thing. So yeah, I would say I do agree with that statement.
I'm curious, Alex, your experience.
So are you ready? It depends, right? It's so like the way this works, right, is like you have a new team or a new company, new organization, and if you allow the devs, the development teams, just kind of decide how they want to run things, then you end up with very disparate setups. Right. And now you have problems sharing resources. Things get very expensive there. People can't switch from one team to the other because suddenly you have to learn an entirely new stack. So people say, no, stop. We need infrastructure teams. We need a platform team. We need to standardize on everything. Right. So you start standardizing on things. And now you're all running on the same platform, using the same orchestrations. You are relying on the same database types. Right. Maybe you have 2 or 3, depending on exactly how they're supposed to be used. And now you have everything consolidated. But in order to make that efficient, now you have to enforce more rules. Right. The rules of the road, as was just kind of mentioned, but eventually these rules become too strict. So then you end up with shadow IT, right? So now you end up with developers who are like, well, I'm sick of all those rules. I'm sick of this platform. I want to do it my way. I want to run this kind of database instead of relying on that kind of database. It's all kind of cyclical, right? And it's all about treading the line, right? It's all about finding the right balance in between things. There's no perfect answer of saying, here is how platformy you should be versus here's how much freedom people should have. It's always going to be a conversation going back and forth, and it's going to change over time for any organization. No one's ever going to make a decision and that's what you run on for all time. Like, that's not realistic because your product's going to change. Your customer expectations are going to change. Your developer expectations are going to change, right? Even down to just like the language that was popular 10 years ago no longer is. So you can no longer find new engineers that even know that language, right? Like, there's so many different things that come into play. But really, I think the most important lesson is, it depends, and be thoughtful about things, right? Ask yourself on a regular basis, how are things going? Are things working for us right now? Are people happy with the tools we're providing them, with the platforms we're providing them, with the infrastructure that we're providing them? And if not, what needs to change? And it's an ongoing conversation. It's not a single solution. There is no single best practice that applies to everyone. It's like everything else. It's a conversation, and just make sure you have the best data so you can have the right conversations.
Yeah, and someone just pointed out in chat too that this is kind of a lot of those tasks that you were describing is, we used to call that enterprise architecture, and you'd have architecture teams, right? You'd have architecture review boards, and there's nothing new under the sun, right? We're rebranding kind of processes that have always existed in some way.
Right. And like, I just want to note, those processes are not wrong, right? We can sit here and poke fun at the concept of an old architecture review board and a million layers of bureaucracy and having to get approvals from teams X, Y, and Z, even if team Z isn't in any way at all involved with this decision or product, and we can kind of just be like, oh, that's old fashioned. But no, we're still doing that today. We're just giving it different names, right? Like, a lot of what we've discovered in the past is actually very useful social technical data we can use to approach these problems. It's just that our technologies are different. And, frankly, marketing departments like when we give things new names.
Yeah. Jason?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I love the idea of, of having those guidelines or, that roadmap sort of thing. It reminded me of a conversation that I had just recently with a buddy of mine, Aaron Clark, who's over at RBC, the Royal Bank of Canada. And the conversation stems because he is now a developer advocate, which is interesting because all of us here are in that DevRel developer advocacy space, but we all work for companies that are building tools for engineers, and he's not. And so the question that I had for him was like, how did you get into this, right? Because I always knew him as an engineer. And it turns out that he sits within the cloud platform team at RBC. And the whole point of this is exactly what we're talking about, is they have, 10,000 engineers in this organization, right? And so it's, dozens, if not hundreds of different teams working on different services. Everybody's using their own framework and they're all moving to the cloud. And they realized, like, Aaron, you're really good at telling people, like, knowing what this technology is and the best ways to use it, like realizing that as a cloud team, that's the biggest strength that they have, is to inform people and educate the engineers within the group of, like, these are the possibilities available, and trying to ensure their success. And so a lot of it for him is just that idea of, here's what is available, but also keeping some of that flexibility of, like, if this framework doesn't work for you, right? If you've got to ship a feature and framework, X, but cloud platform supports framework Z, like, we're not going to make you switch, because that's going to throw your whole timeline into just, like, on its head. But we can actually sit there and we can provide some advice and help you plan out. Like, so eventually, if you plan to migrate, like, that can happen.
Yeah, I think there's another way to look at this too, Jason, is that there's sort of some of this harkens back to the old control and choke points of the past of, an architecture or a platform team. And now we control what you can do and what you can't do. It can't, if you don't take that approach, it can actually be the point of innovation to say, we know we need to continually upgrade what database we're using or what stack we're using for this, or, et cetera, some open source component, and be a team that, as you introduce that into projects, then you can roll that out to other projects if you make that part of your platform engineering process. So it's not a static control thing. It is an engineering and ongoing process. And that can be very productive. The other factor is, and I think you were kind of alluding to this, there's a low friction way of getting things done, and then there's the hard way. Go build it all yourself. You can get started and going quickly, easy. And there's some things that we have set up for you, and then others you can go do what you want to do. It's not all pre-described or determined. So hopefully that's a benefit to developers to get started and get going quickly and make some results.
The other thing I wanted to add is, I think the common theme here, and I do agree, is having, like, flexibility. Because I think, to both Jason and Alex's points, having things that are, like, so rigid that, like, things evolve, right? And if we're not giving our organizations the flexibility to evolve along with technology, it makes it really hard for us to, like, innovate and do good things, right? And I think that's what hampers more than anything, like, especially in these large enterprisey settings, like these architecture review boards and, like, the long approval processes, like the endless red tape. You're trying to do something cool, but it's like, no, you must use, like, some ancient Java framework for your stuff, and with some ancient Java version, because that's what's been approved. Like, that's not cool either.
But I also think that, unfortunately, this space in particular, the SRE DevOps space, has become too enamored with the constant need for innovation just for innovation's sake. The constant need, right? Chasing shiny objects, right? Everyone must now be using technology X, because talking heads like me and the rest of us
because our
Twitter,
paychecks depend on it. Let's get it
right,
clear. Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's part of it, right? Because chances are we have something to sell you, right? But there is, I think, a potential problem that I've been seeing crop up more and more the last few years, where I talk to people at companies and they feel legitimately inadequate and sometimes bad about themselves, that they're not doing proper observability. They're not doing chaos engineering. They're not doing SLOs. And I try to tell these people, like, it's actually maybe okay, right? Like, we don't have to constantly innovate. Sometimes the old ways are just fine, right? Like, again, it depends on your situation, of course, but chasing innovation for innovation's sake, I think, can be as much of a detriment as forgetting to innovate.
I like really like that point. And it's like we were saying earlier, right? A lot of the things that you are already doing, probably a lot of the processes that you might follow, modern SRE in a lot of ways is taking those processes and putting a different coat of paint on them. Like, the reason that, review boards exist, the reason change controls exist. When you get down to it, what is our obsession with CI/CD, if not a way to codify that and automate it? So just because you're doing something a different way doesn't mean it's the wrong way. And I think that goes even beyond this into just talking about cloud native in general, right? Like, you can be very cloud native without really ever touching the cloud as a organization, right?
Mhm.
I would say that you can build a cloud native app on, a rented via, on an actual data center you own, and that's more cloud native than whatever monolithic, Java app you lift and shifted into EC2. We get very hung up, as someone said, on the shiny objects and not chasing value. With that in mind, I wonder if it might be helpful then to recontextualize how we talk about building SRE and building these platforms away from people that are pursuing kind of the shiny object and more towards, like, what are we hiring for? What are we actually looking for in terms of work output? Because I'm kind of hearing something that sounds a lot like we should be hiring people that are able to kind of look at your system, look at your organization, and then do analysis and write blogs and give talks on how to kind of optimize and improve the systems you have, rather than cutting out the legs of whatever's there and building something new.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I'd wholeheartedly agree, right? I mean, that's one reason that, to Alex's point earlier, that SLOs has become a thing, right? Is what are my objectives? And I think that we've seen that across the industry, really, is a focus on, like, what's the value that we're delivering, and then analyzing that and measuring each of our systems and our applications and what we're doing against that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm of course at least slightly biased, as the SLO dude or whatever. But one of the reasons I fell in love with SLOs is because once I started to internalize them, I realized I'd been doing them my entire life in every industry I'd ever worked in, right? Because these are simple truths, right? SLOs is also like a hip buzzword, right? It is lingo, it is jargon, right? I get all that as well. But the simple concept of don't let the great be the enemy of the good is like 5,000 years old, right? Like, humans have long realized you can't be perfect, so don't try to be perfect and just try to be the right amount. And and that's really what SLOs give you, and that's why I love them so much, right? And perhaps you don't have to measure them at the most nitty-gritty level, but the philosophy behind it, the idea of don't try to be perfect, measure the right things, measure the things that actually matter, and then try to be reasonable about how often you achieve those things. Like, that's why I love them. Like, that's why I think they're really such an important approach.
Yeah. And I think when you think of it like that, that helps recontextualize what you're doing and how you're making decisions about your team and about what shiny objects you want to pursue. Because I don't think it's enough to just say, like, okay, we're going to take the existing process and we're going to slap it into some sort of forms tool and, add some emails to make it easier. I guess my actual employer probably wouldn't want me to say that, but I think there is, like, a level of, like, if you do accept that, like, okay, the more important thing is getting these sort of lessons about, SLOs and about measuring things that matter and about doing our work in a way that's sustainable. I think that changes the calculus, right? Because then it's less about, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find some big thing that just solves all my problems, and I'm going to, it's like, all right, everyone into the Kubernetes boat, and more like, okay, we have some specific needs, some specific quantifiable needs. What is the tooling we need to support that? And what is the training we need to, how do we enable our engineers on that? And so on and so on and so forth. It becomes, it's a nuance, but I think it's an interesting one. Adriana, it looked like you had something to say a moment ago before I cut you off. My bad.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
One thing I'm curious about is kind of bring it back in the context of SRE. I think maybe, Alex, you said you kind of decided they aren't the same thing, platform engineering and SRE, at least for you. Maybe that was at Google. I don't remember what you described. Are we headed down parallel paths, or are these separate things? or should they really be combined together? What is our panel's thoughts? I reference you, Alex, so you get to either defend or confirm or whatever.
I think, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot the last few months, a lot of 2022. I'll probably have some writing and stuff about this later on this year because it's really been occupying a lot of my thought. And I don't think what site reliability engineering means matters anymore. And that's coming from someone who has, like, it's part of my identity. It really is, right? Like, I am a site reliability engineer. I don't care what my current title is, right? Like, I don't care. Like, it is something that's deeply ingrained in me. But I don't think it matters if we can agree on a single definition. Right? I don't think that's time worth spending on things because we're never going to agree anyway. And so, maybe we need to explicitly define SRE as, again, like a set of philosophies and approaches that teams can use. And if you want to use the title, go for it. And if you don't. Part of it likely involves proper platform engineering, but perhaps it doesn't at your organization. That's kind of my current take is that perhaps the obsession with even trying to define what these things mean in the first place is not actually productive and doesn't actually help anyone.
It's almost the way the DevOps is. There's no manifesto. There's no credo. There's no set of five. There are books, but they aren't the end all, be all to it.
No, I mean, like DevOps was originally.
I was just saying, it feels like everyone's got their own interpretation.
And part of that is because DevOps was never intended to be a strictly defined concept. It was never intended to be a job title, right? It was always intended as originally formulated, just like, hey, Dev and Ops should probably talk more, right? Like they should probably get along better, right? Like I know that's overly simplifying things, but that's, it was a concept. It was an idea. It was like, why don't we take these same teams we have, but make them better, and then it got hip, and then Gartner got a hold of it, and then various other marketing departments did, and then suddenly people have the title of DevOps engineer, and I'm not like casting any sort of shame on anyone that has that title, right, or anyone that works in a DevOps department or anything like that, right? It's just natural, like that's how things work. But that means at a certain point in time, just like what's happened with DevOps, I think maybe with SRE as well, we just have to be like, it's an approach, it's a philosophy, it's not a clearly defined thing anymore.
I think that's a great point about how it isn't a clearly defined thing, and it sort of touches back to our question of, are these different, right? SRE and platform engineering, because I had someone recently reach out and they were looking for mentorship, and they're like, I want to be an SRE, how do I get started? And my response to them was, well, as an SRE, you probably need these sets of skills. And so I touched a little bit on, like, you should probably know a bit of infrastructure, a bit of cloud, definitely some monitoring, observability in there. And the more that I was chatting with this person, I was like, yeah, but all of these skills really are like, I mean, if I said you're a platform engineer, you would have all these skills or you'd be working on them. For the most part, if you were an ops person, even to some degree, if you're a developer, you should have all these skills. And that made me really start to question, similar to you, like, maybe SRE really isn't a role, or maybe it is, and we're all SREs.
I think I forget who I'm cribbing this from. I think it might be Amy Toby, because she has all the good ideas about SRE. But I saw something that was really shocking. It's like SRE isn't a title, it's a team, right? And I think that really struck a chord with me, because when I think of places I've been that have, like, what I would say highly effective engineering cultures around reliability and around observability and around continuous integration and delivery and right? It's never that there's one SRE hero in the corner that is putting these 20 different functions in their back and pulling the rest of the organization forward. It's someone that is building a team that is, depending on the size of the organization, right? It might be very embedded, right? Where you've got someone that's mostly like a front end person, but is really interested about web perf and about reducing bundle size, right? So they're very interested in this sort of more optimization opsy thing. And you've got someone on a database, a DBA that's really curious about, like, hey, I really want to version control these I want a better way to handle rollbacks, right? Or I want a better way to handle schema migrations. And so they're getting into that. And then there's people that are, really into unit testing, or really into, and then there's ops people that really like scripting and want to help, automate more of this away, and testers and da-da-da-da-da. And it's a team in the sense of an affinity group, right? It's not a team in the sense of we're all wearing the same shirt and we have numbers on our back, but it's people embedded in the organization at positions where they can influence the direction, that are accepting of this culture, that accept the responsibilities and the aims of SRE, that are pushing the organization towards better principles and practices.
And I really like what you said there about, it isn't just one person sitting in the corner being a hero. Because, if it is, their title is probably system administrator and not SRE.
That's true, yeah. And they probably make less than the developers that are just tossing binaries to them.
One of the things that SRE has done is elevate reliability. I think that's helped bring that to the conversation in improving reliability of our systems, of our stack, of our applications. Someone in chat, I hate to refer to people as numbers, brought us back to the attention of, it is also about application reliability as well as the platform itself. So it is kind of the full all the layers up to the app and beyond.
Well, with that in mind, now that we've solved all the problems, what do we think is next, right? Like, we've talked a lot about sort of the genesis of all this. We've talked a lot about how it's interpreted, but I am genuinely curious. Where do we see kind of the platform and SRE movement going? Is SRE old hat and all of the SREs will be replaced by platform engineers in 12 months? Or is something else completely different going to happen, right? I'm curious for everyone's thoughts.
My thought, in much to the chagrin of John Allspaw, is that it's all going to be replaced by resilience engineers, whatever that is.
I like it.
Because it's probably too late to save that term too, right? Just like reliability
absolutely
barely means what reliability actually means. Observability has been co-opted. John's fighting the good fight, and so are plenty of other people to try to ensure that resilience doesn't lose its meaning either. But especially resilience engineering, I think that I'm sorry, John, if you're listening, I have a hunch. Unfortunately, that one's over too. It's always going to be a push against marketing to try to hold on to these terms, and that might really be. I didn't even intend for this to get there, but this might really be a really important part of this entire conversation, right? Like our talk today, it's framed right. Like, what is this? What is platform engineering? What is SRE, right? And I've kind of touched before that I'm like, I don't know if it matters anymore. And I think it's why, because no matter what we try, someone's going to come up with a different definition, and a marketing department's going to run with it. And hey, I do a lot of marketing today. That's not against marketing departments, right? Like I get, like, but this is just how things work. Definitions change over time. Language evolves. That's why we have to come up with new terms, right? That's maybe why everyone's talking about platform engineering. So they're like, well, I don't know what to do with DevOps and SRE anymore. So how about we call it this, And that's just going to continue to happen over and over and over again. In the meantime, I think the important part is, are you solving the right problems for you?
I think it's a good point, because no one owns the term, right? People will co-opt it to mean, as soon as there's energy around it that it's resonating with people, other folks are going to co-opt it to mean what they want it to mean. So, but I think your point is extremely important. What's behind it? Why are we talking about this? Why is that part of what needs to be the fabric of our engineering process, or our team, or our culture? All of that. So, whether it's reliability or resiliency, et cetera. So are we saying, doesn't matter what you call it, doesn't matter if it's one team or two or five, it's about the principles of platform engineering and the principles of SRE, as lightly as defined as they are. They're not cast in stone. And are we doing those things? Because if you take that kind of approach, it's a lot easier to adapt it to an organization you have than reconstituting your organization in some new structure that is forced to fit somebody else's definition. It may not actually work very well for you.
I wonder what Adriana thinks, because she has built platform teams.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
did we come back? Did we back our way into the correct answer, or?
You've got me all like a little bit depressed, but with this idea of like, well, we're not nitpicking on, we're wasting all this energy nitpicking on these definitions, because I do feel like I spent a chunk of time nitpicking on these definitions. But you make a really good point that, like, why are we spending all this energy nitpicking on these definitions when at the end of the day, I think our goals are, software systems are complex. They're more complex than they were, 20 years ago. What do we need to do to ensure that these things are running in a way that our customers expect them to be running, in a way that our engineers are not burnt out, and in a way that we have this mutual understanding and respect between our developers and our operators? Because I think, that was what DevOps attempted to bridge. I don't know that we've done that. All we've done was insert another job title in the middle, but I think that's what we ought to strive for.
I think those are 3 really good points, right? Like those are great bullet points right there. That's what we should be focused on, for sure.
Other thoughts, Jason?
No, I mean, to be honest, I think Adriana expressed it really well. Although I guess I wanted to dovetail on that and maybe ask one other question, right? Since the whole title of this was building a platform and SRE team, I think to flip that, my question would back to Adriana would be, like, as someone that's built, these teams, for the folks that are listening in, how then do you hire for those teams, right? Like, what are you looking for? What should our audience be aware of as they're either trying to hire or trying to be hired for a team like a platform team or an SRE team, things like that?
I think for me, at least when I was hiring for my teams, I was looking for somebody with like software engineering experience. And I'm not saying like you have to be like a software engineering guru, but someone who appreciates software engineering, but also appreciates like processes behind like how to operate our software. And I think that was, I think, one of the trickiest things. Like my last team at 2 Cows, my platform team, it was an interesting team because we ran a Hashi stack, and we were also writing software that made it easier to interact with the Hashi stack. So when hiring for the team that was writing that software, I needed somebody who, yes, could write software, but also had an appreciation for these DevOps practices. And I think that's what we need more of. Is this mutual admiration, appreciation, understanding between these 2 worlds.
Very interesting. Well, we're coming up near the end of our time. Why don't we do one last tap of each of us? Just some parting thoughts. If you were going to take something away from our conversation, either you have or suggest to people that are participating with us. And by the way, we've got some great comments, fantastic comments, and stick around because we're going to give out our gift cards here at the very end. So Austin, I'll end with you. Maybe Jason, if you want to start out, then Alex, Adriana, and then Austin.
Yeah, I think my parting thoughts really starts from one of the early things that I think we've all sort of mentioned is, focused on the value. What's the value that you're delivering out there? So, as you're building teams, as you're maybe thinking of joining a team, keep that in mind. Like, what's the value that you're delivering for the company or the organization that you're working at? And as long as you keep that as a North Star, I don't think you'll go wrong.
Alex.
Yeah, and to build on that, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this is that maybe you shouldn't listen to anything any of us have to say, because we don't know what your organization looks like. We don't know what your service looks like. We don't know what your customer needs are. We don't know what your compliance looks like, what your legal requirements are, right? Like half the tools that we may hawk, like you may not even be allowed to use for various reasons, and so yeah, just be thoughtful, make meaningful decisions, and do what's right for you and your own customers.
I definitely agree with do what's right for you. I would also say, like, have some empathy, because I think that's that bridging gap between the devs and the ops side. And while you don't want to innovate for innovation's sake, also don't be afraid of innovating. Like, pushing the bar is what moves us forward and makes technology better. But do it with caution. That was my takeaway from this panel, and I think it's something that people should keep in mind.
I want to. I think I subscribe to everything that was just said, but the one thing I also want to add that I didn't really touch on, but something that I've been thinking about for a while, is how SRE, DevOps, Agile, all of these things are really about organizational power and about who gets to make decisions about the allocation of resources in the workplace. And in general, I think SRE, DevOps, Agile, everything else is really about saying, we as the people that are building the software want to have a bigger say in how the software is run, right? And where we invest our time. It's about finding a balance between, reliability work and feature work, sure. But it's also about saying, these are the shape of the tools we want, and we want we want to use the cool cloud stuff, and we don't want to have to deploy everything over FTP or whatever. So it's not, I think we get ourselves in a situation with thinking about trends in title or whatever, and we limit ourselves to thinking about just like, well, how does this work with the tech, right? How is this just a technical thing? But it's really far more of a socio-technical and political statement than it is an actual technical statement, right? Change control, again, CI is just change management. All of this stuff that we do in terms of processes changed very little from the 70s, but we are just finding new and exciting ways to kind of put it in different terms so that we can have a bigger say about how that scarce allocation of resources is performed in our organizations. So my advice, my takeaway is think broadly about stuff like this. Don't limit yourself to just thinking about sort of the technological or the businessy use case justifications. Think about how are your teams a reflection of sort of who makes decisions and how those decisions are made.
If I could add one quick thing to that,
yeah, go to it.
Make sure when you're going broad, as Austin just said, right? When you're taking this broad approach, make sure you're also looking to how other industries have solved similar problems, because that's, I think, something else very important. We live in a silo very often in the tech world without realizing that if we just looked over here, maybe we'd already have an answer for this social technical problem, right? So don't just be broad within tech. Be broad across like all of human knowledge. There's a lot of cool stuff we learned over the years.
Be integrative.
Like the millennia.
Really important. Good point. I'll just add to the conversation, like any of these things, whether it's DevOps or Agile or SRE, there's a light side and a dark side to all of it, right? They can be taken too far and become the dogma of the organization and used for control and used for the wrong purposes. It's about what it's about, and it's taking those ideas and those things and learning from it, learning from each other. And to Adriana's point, bringing the empathy, recognizing that it takes all these functions, all the people that are working together to make this system happen, make it work, and to continue to evolve it and innovate over time. So stay out of the dogma territory. If you're fighting about it, you're probably not quite on track. It's like, well, let's go back to first principles again, and let's make platform engineering and SRE happen. So Well, thank you. You all have been a fantastic panel. Austin and Lightstep, really appreciate you sponsoring the SRE show and this roundtable. You're fantastic co-host. Alex, great to see you again. Adriana, loved all your contributions, and Jason, good luck on your journey back in your career path. It's great that you were with us here today too. I'm going to turn it back over to Cody. He's going to announce who our winners of the gift cards are.
Well, thank you so much, Mitch. And I'd also like to thank Austin, Adriana, Alex, and Jason for joining us today. So those 4 winners for our $425 Amazon gift card drawing, we have Kadu B, Milorad T, Marcelo F, and Belvis W. So to the 4 of you, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card, but if you don't happen to see that email, please check your spam folder. I'd also like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that this session was recorded. You should be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. So to our panel, thank you. Lightstep from ServiceNow, thank you so much for sponsoring today's webinar. And to our audience, we really appreciate you taking time to be with us today. We ask for 1 extra moment of your time to fill out a brief post-webinar survey, but otherwise, we do hope to see you at an upcoming Techstrong Learning webinar or workshop. Everyone, have a great rest of your day.